Great, thanks so much, Gordon, and thank you all for inviting me to be here today. So our session this afternoon is on innovations in city service delivery, quicker, faster, cheaper. And so before we begin, I want to say we're going to have time at the end for a couple of questions from the audience. So when we start thinking about this, the value of making data-driven decisions is more important than ever because many cities nationwide are still dealing with the post-recession realities of decreased city revenues, limited intergovernmental aid, and smaller municipal workforces. At the same time, there's a growing trend towards making the inner workings of municipal government more accountable and transparent. Data-driven decisions help local governments provide city services that are efficient, effective, and transparent. So what we want to do in today's conversation is really dig into what strategies are cities like Pittsburgh, New York City, Chicago, and others using, and how well are they faring in the push to break down barriers. As a result of advanced data analytics and open data, cities are now able to better predict service level needs and proactively provide services to residents. So the big question we want to answer is, are we getting closer to a world where service providers are more accountable and more responsive? And to do that, we have two experts on the panel, Stephen Goldsmith and Deborah Lamb. So Steve and Deborah have distinct but equally important vantage points into the process of innovating to be better, faster, and cheaper. As a current leader in the field and the author of this book, The Responsive City, and the former mayor of Indianapolis and deputy mayor of New York City, a local elected official. With Deborah's wealth of experience and current role serving as Pittsburgh Chief Performance and Innovation Officer, she can speak to what the day-to-day process of innovating looks like from the city staff perspective. And so to start, we're going to start with Steve here. What motivates city leaders to design a local government that is more effective and efficient, and how can citizens be engaged in this process?
Well, city leaders are motivated out of demand, right? There's no choice. They're also motivated by public spiritness. So I think we're at a particularly interesting time. I've been in local government for 30 years, essentially, district attorney or mayor or deputy mayor or the like. And through that period of time, we've seen these kind of ebbs and flows of what happens in cities. But today, we have really a fascinating confluence of factors. We have demands that exceed the revenues that are available. We have an engaged citizenry that, you know, they get what they want from Amazon and they don't get personalized service from the city, so they're less tolerant of bad service. But at the same time, we have a huge set of new technical tools that are available to city leaders to perform better service. You know, whether it's how you perform your call center service or how you actually do the activity itself. So just all together, I think then that you have this opportunity for transforming the relationship between the citizen and the city in a way that's never been before. Now we're restricted because we still organize our city bureaucracies in a very hierarchical, command and controlled, activity-driven way that reduces the ability of our citizens to respond to those needs. But what drives public leaders today, and I would say every public servant, union servant, manager in our cities, is to deliver a higher quality service to residents. And all we have to do is kind of connect the open data movement, the performance data movement, you know, the data analytics movement, and the new tools that give more discretion, and we can actually produce on that.
Makes a lot of sense. Deborah, you're on the front lines with service delivery in your city. What does the process of providing open data and data analytics look like from your perspective?
Thanks, Brooks. One of the first pieces of legislation that we passed under the new administration with Mayor Peduto that some of you may have heard yesterday in February was the open data legislation. And it passed unanimously in City Council, and that made all data that was non-confidential, non-personal data open by default. And that basically set the policy framework for open data. But as many of you know, the policy itself is not enough. It's certainly a very important component to allow us to go in this direction, but we need to have additional pieces or tools, as Professor Goldsmith talked about. So in the interim, we have conformed an open data management team that has come up with representatives from each of the different departments, working with them to identify the data sets, clean up the data sets, identify the different needs of the users in the community. We're also piloting some Data 101 training to local government officials. Because it's not just about releasing the data, it's about understanding and the application of the data to inform decision making. So it's been an ongoing process. I think one of the more difficult areas that we found around open data is just trying to identify where the data is. We always say, data is everywhere and exists, but at the end of the day, how do we actually apply it and use it? How are we actually finding it? Data might be in a closet somewhere in someone's office that was, gone for years and no one knows about it. And that's important. That's history. That provides a historic baseline to where we are. So it's an important part in trying to understand the roadmap for open data.
Picking up on this idea of data and tools, how has it been used in cities to proactively address problems? Steve, can you provide some examples from Chicago, Boston, and New York City?
Right, so I run this project at Kinney School called Data Smart Cities. We've been trying to kind of look at the use of big data and predictive analytics. Let me answer your question by kind of agreeing and connecting it with Deborah's answer, right? So we have we have several different movements, right? We have open data, and that open data can affect this conversation if it's well visualized and easily consumable and people can do something with it. Then we've got the social media conversation in the community itself where people are discussing various activities. Irrespective of whether they actually call 311, there is a conversation about the quality of the park or the quality of the neighborhood. And then you have what we think about as big data and predictive analytics, which is the data inside the government enterprise itself, or government enterprises. So and that's actually then even more complicated because, as most people in the audience understand, because they do it day to day, that the big answers are are horizontal answers, and government is a vertical organization, right? So people live in a community. They don't live in the Parks Department, they don't live in the Public Works Department, they don't live in the Transportation Department, they live in a community. And so if we're gonna look at predictive analytics, we're gonna have to look at the community organized and initiated data, we're gonna look at the open data, and then we're gonna look at the data. We're gonna figure out that the answer to this person's homelessness problem is a drug issue, or that the answer to this particular job training program is in some other area. So predictive analytics, and this is where if you look at better, faster, cheaper, and this is my kind of the area which I feel kind of the most evangelistic about, right? We have a government that produces the same widget day after day for the same person. Everybody is alike, right? But not everybody isn't alike. There's outliers everywhere, and we can predict, as we did in New York City, where the next fire is going to occur, right? Where the next crime is going to occur, which families are going to have issues with their child welfare workers need to know about so they can predict which provider is good with which child. So as we begin to reorganize in a better, faster, cheaper, we'll say, look, let's take the commodity production of government, reorganize it so we're spending more time on the outliers and less time on those that don't need it, whether we regulate, the way we license, the way we intervene, the way we organize, the way we look at solutions. And that then, to me, is the last big aha of the predictive analytics movement, which says government today manufactures activities that also often don't produce outcomes. But with predictive analytics and big data, we can now figure out which one of these activities produces more of these outcomes. And so I think I see a total reorganization of the allocation process and solution process of government based on predictive analytics.
Picking up on the better, faster, cheaper theme, Deborah, what service delivery improvements have you seen in Pittsburgh as a result of your work, and how are these achieved? Knowing you've only been.
Well, I think, touching on Professor Goldsmith, I think there's a few things that is important to keep in mind that I've learned. There's the external facing side, which is what actually is the public facing in terms of the delivery of the services that are faster, cheaper, internal process that takes a lot of time. I think we spent early on in the administration just trying to understand the internal process. It's very hard to just say, we're gonna have everything online. Let's just have we're gonna start accepting credit card payments and have everything online, and that will achieve that goal. One of the big things, even before we start looking at making online payments or having marriage license or licenses online, is the security. apparatus of the technology. So we are going through a security audit of our back-end systems and trying to understand that. People might not know about this in the interim before we put out online payments, but it's an important component to it. And I think it touches a lot in terms of what the public is actually able to see at the end versus the back-end stuff that needs to happen. We are working towards eliminating annual permit day. I don't know if other cities have this, but once a year, there is a huge line that kind of circles around City Hall where people register for shelter permits among the different parks. And it's one day, and it's a lottery system, so families really strategize in terms of how to get a good ticket number in order to register for their community park for graduations or parties or birthdays for this. And it's just something that has been in place for a long time, where you're using a paper-based calendar and paying in cash or check one of these shelters. We hope to eliminate annual permit day through hoping that, like any other service, you can book online. You can book a shelter, any one of the number of the different park shelters online, but it's a twofold process in the sense that we have to works because they're the ones that actually maintain a lot of these permitings and have the back-end systems, but we also have to talk to the city parks department because they're the ones that actually maintain some of the aspects of it and collect the payment to then go through budgeting. And together we are going through a process where we are securing the back-end system in order to eliminate the annual permit day. But you won't know that until we finish all this organizing and collaboration. So it's a process.
Yeah. Thinking forward, a question for both of you is, what do you see as the top 3 trends and how technology will shape the future of service delivery? Start with you, Steve.
There's one trend would be to think about how we're going to induce the use of discretion on the part of field workers in solving problems, right? So now that we have ubiquitous mobility tools, and we think we've made these great breakthroughs because the work that used to be on in the folder now is in the handheld device, is really scratching the surface. So the next big trend is, how do we send decision support tools to field workers and then give them more discretion to figure out how to solve a problem, whether the problem is Child Protective Service workers or how you fill the pothole or where the pothole is located, or even better in predictive analytics world, what caused the pothole to develop in the first place, right? So it's the leveraging of cloud computing and analytics into that. The second, and Deborah, I think her last answer sets this up, is there is really no reason why every resident of a city cannot have a personalized relationship with his or her city. They ought to be able to, when I was deputy mayor of New York, the #1 call, we had 20 million calls a year to our call center, 20 million. The #1 call is our alternate side parking in New York City today. We just wanted to scream and say, just sign up for an outbound text and we'll tell you whether, you tell us the streets you care about, we'll tell you whether that street's relevant. Well, you want to know when the park's going to be open, we'll tell you when the park's going to be open. So we ought to have an on-demand, personalized sense of government. And then lastly, in the terms of big trends, is that and many of the cities today, I think, have agency-level CIOs who maybe don't have the sophistication of Deborah, and that is to say that all of these, how many times have you heard, I have a legacy system, it doesn't communicate with somebody else's legacy system, it doesn't talk to their system. But the data mining tools today are so dramatically better than they were 24 months ago that we'll see the predictive analytics work, mine the data across the various silos, predict the solution of problems, and rearrange the resources to solve those. I think the combination of those three will produce a very dramatically more effective government.
Great. Deborah, did you have anything to add there?
I would just add one more thing. I very much agree with Professor Goldsmith in terms of those trends, but another thing that I would like to see, and I am pushing for, is to see millennials working in local government, you know, the people aspect. The average city worker is aging, and city government is traditionally not seen as a prestigious place to go upon graduation in the likes of banking or other professions. But I challenge that. I think it's actually, because of the work of Professor and many of you here, it's an exciting place to be. It's a very dynamic place. It's where real change can happen. And I think there's been a lot of really good fellowships that have been starting to capture a greater audience, but really trying to drive a greater push for millennials to work in local government. But then at the same time, once millennials do enter, to have an actual career development trajectory. Right. So they're not just there for the 2 years or the 3 years and then go off to graduate school or another profession. You know, we in local government need to build a proper career trajectory where they can see that they could be on the way to making bigger and more progressive changes as they go along. I mean, that people aspect is really fundamental behind, you know, the technology or, you know, all the bells and whistles. It's the people, and it's the people that, you know, really have the skill sets, really have the capacity, and really have the energy and drive to really make that difference.
This is such, can I just agree with this for a second? I mean, this is like the most important comment of the session, right? Because everybody knows what the technology tools are, so you say, why aren't they applied more frequently? Well, one is we need to recruit more and better people into government, but also an answer is, once they're there, and for some of the people who are there, how do we create an environment where they can actually innovate, right? And in many of the, you know, innovation delivery units and the other activities of city government today, those are mayoral-led, and so that mayor then gives people the portfolio to kind of run amok through government and invent cool things. But some of it is agency-led as well. But the point is that if we don't re-examine our job classification systems, our HR systems, our procurement systems, I mean, all of those things that just suffocate discretion, then those folks in Pittsburgh will come to work for Deborah because she's cool and they like to work for her. But they won't stay if they can't add value, right? And so our systems have to be kind of, we have to break through those old, regressive systems with kind of leadership that provides an environment for the people that Deborah's able to recruit.
This is a real great point, and I think we have a wonderful opportunity with people coming back to cities right now, particularly with millennials coming, to really draw them into local government. And I think this is a perfect point to take some questions from the audience right now. So if there's anybody that wants to come up to the mics, we'd love to take a question. I can't see. Okay. Oh, there we go.
Really hard to see.
Over to the right here.
Yeah, hello, Jean-François Tremblay with EY, Ernst & Young. I'm in the Global Automotive Center. A transportation-related question to you is, do you see that cities could eventually come up with an offering to the business community by licensing the right to use a bus route for a number of years with city employees or not, depending on the scheme, and of course imposing your energy vision into that licensing. So how can we see that infrastructure as part of an asset that you can rent without, of course, getting into, you know, it has to stay balanced, of course, that scheme. Is it something that you are considering?
So, question. So I've probably done more public-private partnerships correctly and incorrectly than most people. And so the question's fascinating because the issue is, as a public official, how do we get more value out of the private sector, protecting the values that we want and purchasing the innovation that the private sector can have, right? So you say, well, let's think about this. We could outsource our parking meters. And you go, well, okay, maybe yes, maybe no. But then if you said, wait a minute, hold a second. One of the most valuable things the city has is the real estate along the curb, right? So how do we want to manage that real estate for better revenue opportunities and better experience for our communities, right? And that may be parking, that may be parking meters that are interactive, that may be a whole different type of congestion pricing, et cetera. So the same's true on licensed bus routes, right? So you know, do we want to allow these, and how do we want to set these up? You know, New York City makes over $1 billion a year from just licensing rights on the bus shelters. So it's a long question, important question. I would close by saying the city can do any of these if it gets really careful about service level deliveries, quality, access, equity, fairness, and then purchases innovation in how to deliver those things. And we think about these as more than just the way we deliver activities today, then they're big breakthroughs that are possible.
And another question over here.
Yeah, hi. My name's Maggie Corst. I'm one of the Australians here for this conference. It was really to pick up on the point that Deborah was making. I think one of my observations has been that there's a lot of almost incredibly optimistic thinking about what we can do with technology and with data and so on. But we're really poor and have been poor for a long time at how we mobilise the potential of people more broadly. And in government, we're particularly bad at doing that. So I have this feeling that in cities we have a narrative which is a lot about how do we attract talent, when we've often got a huge amount of trapped talent working already in our government administrations that come in, to get jobs in government, you have to be incredibly talented these days. You're very well educated, but the system is often oppressive of people reasonably soon on, and people kind of give up their energy, give up their passion, which is something that cities desperately need. I'm just interested in what our thinking is about how, has been discussed at this session, about how government model is being disrupted. How can we take that and turn it into some positive, energising, transformative process for as much in government as for our cities and places?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that I spend a lot of my time actually doing is not on technology or innovation. It's actually on capacity building. It's internal capacity building. It's trying to bring in the talent, but it's also trying to build a team to think about this kind of stuff. I'm very lucky that I do have a really good team with a good mix of people that have a really deep institutional knowledge, that have, you know, a lot of good history and experience in terms of how government works, how to get things done, but it's also mixed with, you know, new people that are coming in and have different experience in the private and nonprofit community sector. And I think together that creates a really good combination and dynamic, to allude to your point in terms of how do you actually innovate, you know, for the people within government. And I think that's actually really exciting. When you really have that kind of energy and dynamic based on the combination of the people.
So, you know, and just to quickly agree, and then once you do that, we've set up these systems that say, well, how do we make sure people don't abuse their discretion? And so the way we make sure that people don't abuse their discretion is we make sure they have no discretion to abuse, right? So if you're a public employee, we make it difficult for you to be bad, and we make it impossible for you to be really good. And so we have these folks in these systems, and they operate in these rule-driven systems. So, you know, I had this conversation in New York City about health inspections, where we were writing a whole bunch of very minor infractions and driving, you know, small restaurateurs in Queens crazy. And so you say, well, why can't you just use some discretion? And they come back and say, well, we can't because we can't trust this inspector to use his discretion here and not there. But the fact of the matter is, today with technology tools, we haven't talked about this aspect of technology, but not only can we grant the inspector more discretion, but his or her supervisor can now manage the way they use that discretion, right? We know from the tablet and their GPS how long they were in that restaurant, what type of infractions did they write, who were the outliers and too few infractions. So I would suggest that the answer is combine this recruitment effort with an effort that encourages people to solve problems and then finds a new way to hold them accountable instead of just making sure they follow rules mindlessly. The two together could create an exciting dynamic, I think, in cities.
I think we have time for one more quick question, and then we got to wrap it all up.
I actually am really intrigued by your thought of getting millennials into municipalities. I used to work for a municipality in Canada. And what I found, though, is not only that we did have some young people working for us, but it's the actual public involvement side that would probably really benefit from getting this data form of information. Young people are obviously much more connected as members of the public interacting with the city. Can you imagine a future where students could take a picture of the pothole outside their school and send it in to the departments, but inviting them directly to say, get involved at a young age, so you carry that through your lifetime. We want youth to participate in these decisions that we're making. Do you have any great examples of that, and do you see that progressing in the future?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question because there's this great book that Susan Crawford and I just wrote called The Responsive City. It has a bunch of those examples in it, so it gives me an opportunity. Oh, very impressive, thank you. So that's one answer. And the second is really quickly. So, I mean, I've been at local government so long that I know that the definition of community involvement is you make up your mind about what you want to do, then you go to a meeting and get shouted at for 4 hours, and then you go back and do what you were going to do anyway, right? So your definition of community involvement is the socialization of a problem among actively engaged folks using social media. And cities need to think about the use of social media not just as outbound messages about how cool we are, but as creating a platform for engagement, right? So that you socialize the problems. And so I think that and there are cities now considering this, like St. Paul, Minnesota, where we should intentionally ask our consumers what they think of a service, and then socialize those answers. The mayor of DC is asking folks to grade his departments, right? And then he's using those in his performance scorecard. So, but I want it to be more than just one way or two way. It needs to be socialized in kind of a crowdsourcing model, and I think we can intentionally do that and then dramatically affect the way we provide services by listening to those results.
Just quickly, I definitely believe civic duty needs to start at a very young age, and one of the things that we do is we do go out to the schools and play games such as what's the difference between 311 and 911? When do you call 311 and when do you call 911? And we start having that kind of interaction so then the kids know that, you know, there are certain times to call 311 for X, Y, and Z and certain times to call 911. It's that kind of early on education. Another thing that we've gone out to the streets to do is just helping small business owners get their business online, having that online presence. So we go to these community meetings, and often it's the kids of the small business owners that really help their parents set up, you know, their business online and get them on a tech-savvy presence. But that wouldn't happen without them going to some of these town hall meetings and these community meetings with their parents to engage with us and whatnot. So it's both ways. It's them coming out, us going out, and having that dialogue. But it's a lot of really good examples out there that start at a very young age.
Thank you both so much, and I look forward to working with all of you on making city service delivery better, faster, and cheaper.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Thanks, Deborah.